In Chapter 2, one of the components that we have to cover, but that we're going to really scratch the surface on, is macromolecules, carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. We are not going to include nucleic acids, but we are going to cover the structure of ATP, because we're going to talk about that as the energy currency of the cell. So this just is a really broad overview in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to hit on the high points that you've got to know on here. So it says the information provided below is a review of macromolecules covered in biology. This material is foundational content, again, for the course and will be used throughout the year. So let's start with carbohydrates, okay? So in biology, you hopefully learned that you had monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides as categories of carbohydrates. And there you've got the monomer. Okay, so monosaccharides, 2 of those build a disaccharide, and then many of those build polysaccharides. So this is going to be, as far as functions go, short-term energy storage. This is the cell's first choice of fuel, first and foremost. This is what we're going to burn before we burn anything else, is a simple monosaccharide. Then, because disaccharides are a little bit bigger, 2 sugar molecules put together, then we'll burn disaccharides, then we'll burn polysaccharides, such as starch, for example, okay? But to burn those large polysaccharides, we have to break them, our bodies do, down into individual monosaccharides through a process called hydrolysis, where when you're digesting your food, you're adding water, like to a big starch molecule, like if you ate some French fries or some bread. You break those huge starches with water into really simple sugars, okay, such as glucose. And so that being said, sugars are always our first choice of fuel. Notice too that you've got several other things there. This is structural support in plants. It's what makes up the cell wall of plants and is known as cellulose. And we as humans, we don't digest that, but it helps to move food through the digestive tract. You've got glycogen listed there. That is going to be a sugar storage molecule, okay? And that we'll talk about that more, but it's a big polysaccharide, okay? So that's our cell's first choice of fuel as far as what I need you to know now. Okay, I'm just kind of hitting the high points. As far as lipids go, so lipids are made of fatty acids and glycerol. Triglycerides are the most common lipid. Fats, oils, and waxes are kind of just your major categories. So this is the cell's second choice of fuel. So if you burn up all of your carbohydrate stores, then you're going to switch to lipid metabolism. And they talked about this in the homeostasis video when Martina's running a marathon. Very typically with endurance athletes, distance runners, distance bikers, swimmers, they burn up a lot of their carbohydrate stores. And so then they very often are switching to lipid metabolism. And so that being said, second choice of fuel, long-term energy storage. They also can serve as insulation, protection, cushioning, shock absorption, and then chemical messengers, which we don't get into a ton in the grand scheme of things. Okay, I'm going to slide this up, okay, and I may have to refocus. All right, so next, so proteins. Basically in the bottom, or the bottom line here in the grand scheme of things, we do not want to metabolize protein. That's a pretty bad situation. So notice that the monomers of proteins are amino acids. There's 20 amino acids in nature. So proteins have the most varied number of forms and functions and whatnot as far as what they do in our body. So if you look on the far right, functional proteins are known as enzymes. They catalyze chemical reactions and speed them up and make them occur at faster rates than they would without enzymatic activity. Hopefully you learned about that in a lot of detail in biology in the 9th grade as well. Hemoglobin's a protein, insulin's a protein, hormones are proteins, and then proteins build body structures. And so that's super important. Basically, if your body is a structure, and I know that sounds kind of weird, but if it's a structure in your body, it's got protein building that. And notice then too here, they transport molecules. So as well, and then code for the expression of genetic traits as far as other functions. But because our bodies are built of protein, we do not want to metabolize them, okay? When people get into protein metabolism, it's typically because they're not taking in enough fuel in the form of carbohydrates and lipids. Maybe it's somebody with an eating disorder, they're anorexic, they're starving themselves. Maybe they're bulimic and they're binging and purging. It could be somebody who is over exercising, like they're not taking in enough fuel with carbs and lipids to satisfy their exercise activity, if they're doing just too much exercise overall. And so then this is where they might start to break down proteins. And so we do not want to get to that position because of all the varied functions plus the building of structures that proteins do for us. Okay, so desperate situation if you are metabolizing protein. And then the very last thing for now, we will cover much more about ATP when we cover the muscular system, but real quickly, it's structured like a nucleic acid, okay, if you remember what DNA and RNA look like. So it's made of, it's adenosine triphosphate, okay? So in the adenosine model, and ribose sugar, or nitrogen base, a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphates. Between these outer 2 phosphates, that bond that says high energy bond, there's a whole lot of energy stored there, okay? So when you have energy from foods that you've eaten, so pretend you just ate lunch, okay, you've hydrolyzed, let's say, some starch, a hamburger bun, okay, you ate a hamburger for lunch. You're hydrolyzing that starch, breaking it into individual glucose molecules, and then you're going to break that down to make ATP. Well, you're going to put a phosphate on to ADP to make this molecule. And so then your cells, it's like having a full battery. You've got a whole bunch of ATP in order to power daily activities until you get to dinner, okay? So then as you power those daily activities, you break that 3rd phosphate off, okay, of the ATP, and that energy that's released from that bond, that's what allows you to perform the activity. Okay, and ATP is generated in the mitochondria during cellular respiration. It's broken down in the presence of oxygen, right? And so that being said, I'll find a little video clip. There's one I can think of that I'll post with this, but that is just a quick overview of this particular sheet. So you've got a little bit of lecture about it. Let me know if you have any questions.